Now, moving on to the throws that we're going to be using a back step type motion. First, I'm just going to talk about the basic hip throw. Okay, we're from an over and under position. That's sort of the root. The footwork is pretty much the same for all these type of throws. You're basically securing, the difference is you're basically securing a headlock, an arm throw, over and under type hip toss. You're securing the upper body somewhat differently, but the basic goal is back step, the hip pop, and in some way controlling the upper body so that you can guide it over to allow the hips to fly and to allow you to continue to control the throw as you take the person to the mat. Now, the root here, we're going to go from basic over and under. It's going to come more from a pummeling position here, and I'm going to give him a tug. Notice what happened. I gave him a tug. I already pulled him to the side. I wouldn't want to tug him this way because then when I step, I've got much greater distance to step through. So typically when I'm pummeling, right before I throw, I'm going to pull my opponent into my hip so that when I step, I'm coming one way and I'm tugging him the other way, and that's going to increase the speed of my throw. Naturally, if he's coming in at me at 20 miles an hour and I'm coming in at him 20 miles an hour, that's 40 miles an hour total. It's going to be a much quicker throw, and we're going to cut the distance a lot quicker, especially if he's helping me by coming into me. As I do that, I'm going to step. So as I give a tug, I get my back step, and you'll notice which foot is forward when I started. I wouldn't want to start from here because the angle of my hip is unfavorable. I've got a big step I've got to take, a big rotation. That's not very efficient. Before I throw, and that's one of the reasons why typically if I'm going to practice or attack a back step type throw, when I'm digging in with the underhook, that same side foot is forward so that I can go into the throw. It's not the same thing when I'm going to do a body lock type situation or one of the other type of leg and hip blocking throws we're going to do. I might leave the other foot, but for a back stepping type throw, if I'm thinking of that as I'm digging in with my underhook, that same side leg is forward. I'm going to typically pull my opponent into me slightly, and at the same time, my hip comes in. You'll notice my feet come together and they click. Why do I do that? If I just bring my feet together, I can't turn my hip quite as efficiently, but if I cream the inside of this heel or ankle into the inside of this one, it helps turn my heels. The other thing I want you to notice as I'm doing this, and we talked a little bit about this as far as the throw in the first instructional on basic stance and such, on movement, is I want my feet to be here such that my weight is in front of my feet because immediately I've got to be taking the momentum forward. So as I set this up here, I'm going to give a tug and I'm going to come through here. I'm going to control high on the arm. I'm not going to grab so tight here. This is not the point. This arm isn't so important. This arm is what's important. This arm just has to go forward. From here, it's more my shoulder coming this way than trying to pick him up by his waist. That's not so important. So, to throw this, as we're digging here, I'm digging in, I'm digging in. I'm going to give a tug here. At the same time, I'm going to come to this position here. When I pop my hip, I want to cover distance, and I want to launch with my feet. I can't launch with my feet and cover distance if my body is erect, because if I launch, I'm going to launch just upright. If I'm slightly forward and I throw, my momentum is going to be further out. So from here, from this position, I'm going to step and throw. one important thing that you really need to be aware of as you're doing most of these back step type throws that I'm showing you is to be able to, as I'm stepping in, whether it's over and under situation, whether it's headlock or an arm throw, I want to make sure that my hips are coming in low. So I don't want to be stepping in upright here. My hips have to be coming in low. And also, as I come in, I'm going to tend to try to lift my opponent's body up and into me. And that's really critical because a mistake a lot of people make when they're learning to throw, and this is particularly true of a headlock, there's a tendency as they step in here to be jamming the head here. If my opponent's head is near my hip, it's very unlikely that his hip is real close to my hip, and that's really what I need to be popping when I execute my throw. So, for example, if I'm in over under here, when I step, it's crucial that I'm not driving down here in this type of a motion and jamming his head down. I want to lift him up. By lifting him up, one, that's going to get myself lower a little bit easier. As I'm pulling up, it's going to be easier for me to get my hips lower. Two, it's going to ensure that my hip is next to his hip so that I can pop it back and allow the throw to continue effectively, as opposed to getting a lot of space between my hip and his hip so that if I pop, I've not really made contact with anything and I have a little mechanical advantage there to throw him. So, as I step in here, from this position, when I come in, I want to step and I'm going to pull his body up. So I'm going to pull his body up so his head is near my head, therefore his hips are going to be near my hips. And not a situation where, as I step in, I kind of jam my arm down and push his upper body towards my hip, which is going to make there too much distance between my hip and his hip. So again, this notion is really important on a lot of these throws, backstepping type throws. I want to be pulling up as I come in from here, up in this direction, as opposed to stepping through and trying to jam down. So I'm going to lift up, and as you can see, that almost starts getting him over my fulcrum slightly. So when I pop, because his head is near my head, my hips are going to be near his hips. So if you remember that, that's going to help you, I think, in a lot of these type of throws. And if you're having trouble executing some of these throws, think about that. Are you just coming in and trying to drive the person's upper body down, or are you coming up and pulling their upper body up so that way when you pop your hips, you can be sure that your hips are going to be next to their hips. A final point on this over and under type throw, and also applies to most of the other backstepping throws. Generally speaking, I want my opponent to be circling in this direction if I'm going to be stepping with my right foot and coming in. If he's circling this way, I've got a lot of distance to catch up and overcome to get my back step in. So typically, I'm going to give either my opponent a tug to get his weight coming towards the side, towards my right side, or I'm going to want him to be traveling in that direction because he's trying to set up an attack on his own. Okay, so that's an important point, I think, as you're learning these throws. If I'm going to be backstepping with my right foot first, I want my opponent to be coming towards my right side. If it was the opposite, if I was leading with my left foot and I was going to throw from here, I would want my opponent coming in this direction, either because I pulled him that way and manipulated his body, or because that's the way he wants to travel. It's much more difficult to execute a throw when they're coming away, going in a direction away from the direction you're traveling. Okay? Now, another hip throw situation is from a drag. You can drag, and at the same time, as you can get some space, you can come in and you can throw. Let me demonstrate that type of an attack. From a drag situation, what I'm going to do is do the drag as we had talked about it in the earlier instructional. As I tug here, remember we had several different things we would like to do with the drag. Sometimes it's come around and spin. Sometimes it's lower your level and attack double. Another alternative, especially if I can get Kobe to have some space here, as I drag here, instead of spinning high and around here, what I can do is I can get my hip in the way. So from here, I'm going to come to here, and as I'm going to step, at the same time I drag, I'm going to step to here. And I'm going to take the hip throw from that side. More typically than not, you simply get your opponent down to the mat in that situation. That's not the most effective and efficient throw in terms of getting them all the way over on their back. But nonetheless, I think this is a throw that does have some utility. Notice, as I do my drag, for example, with the double leg, as I drag, I would want one foot forward. I'd want the other foot forward if I was going to drag and spin around, as we demonstrated in a different instructional. Likewise, in this situation, just like in most of my throws, I want my right foot forward if this is the direction I'm going to be going in, as opposed to stepping first with this leg. So when I drag, I want to get my feet in the same kind of way. Just do the back part What do you do once you get your opponent down to this position? In wrestling, after I've gotten the throw here, so I had an over and under position, it's critical that I don't stay close to his hips. I'm more likely to be bumped off here, okay, where he's going to have more power. I'm going to tend to want to stay very high up towards his chest, or very high part of his chest, neck, even almost over his face here. I can control him much better here. It's also a mistake for me to get my body parallel to Colby, where he may hook a leg and roll me, or simply come out the backside here. So I want to stay up high, very high up on his shoulders. So you'll see I'm high up here. I'm not even really so much on his chest here. I want to stay up pretty high. Okay, so I'm almost over his face, his upper part of his shoulders, his neck. Also, too, I want my legs out here. This is much better than back here. And then I have a choice to make. One option is to keep my hips facing up. Okay, so my hips are facing up in this position. I'm going to torque here and hold here tight. Okay, now, while I'm doing this, I don't want to have much weight on my butt, because if there's much weight on my butt, there's not much weight on Colby. So I want to be able to keep the weight on Colby. So I want to keep my chest down here. I'm not doing this. My chest is down, even though my hips are up, and I've got a bit of a base here. My preference is to come this way, with my hips down, over top, and you'll notice there's contact on my foot, and on Colby, kind of a tripod here. So he's got a lot of weight on him in this situation. And it's very difficult for him to hook this leg, because it's not anywhere close to his leg. It's over here. And then you can do all of the things you might like to do in jiu-jitsu, or from here, it's not that hard to be able to, for example, to get a mount when you're this high on somebody. You'll notice my hips aren't near his hips. If my hips are near his hips, it's very easy for him to defend. So I don't let him get anywhere close to my hips. My hips are way out here. And that's really critical. Now there's a lot of space. If I do want to come up, I can come up without a problem. Not down here. Again, if my hips are close to his hips, he can loop around. If he bridges up, he may be able to pop me off. I prefer hips down from here, tugging over his head and his face, his neck and his upper chest. And you can control a person very well in that position, and then you can go into the things that you do in your style of submission wrestling. You'll notice the weight is on my opponent, and it's very high. And I think a mistake a lot of people make, wrestlers as well as submission type folks, is there's a tendency to get back here a lot. And I don't have near the control as I do when I'm here. I have much better control in this situation. I'm controlling much smaller, I'm putting my weight on much smaller muscle groups here than back here. Not to mention, if my hips are close to his hips, that's a dangerous position for me.